begin today's meeting, I wanted to turn it over to Frank Brogan for a few quick comments.
Well, first of all, welcome to Fort Lauderdale. We want to thank Florida Atlantic University, and of course, this also happens to be one of the homes of Broward College. And this campus, and hopefully if you've never been here before, you can take a chance to sort of navigate it during the day, because it's a great illustration of shared programming, shared facilities, shared philosophy, and we thank, of course, M.J. Saunders and all the good people at Florida Atlantic University and their board. Bob Stilley is here today, but we also thank David Armstrong and his board, because we are on a shared site, and it's a wonderful example of what people can do when they work together. Before we go into today's agenda, and I turn it back over to Chair Rude to lead us through this very important initial conversation regarding the study that was just completed, we thought it would be appropriate just to take literally a moment to share silence together in the wake of the enormous tragedy that befell the people of Connecticut. Coming out of it again, I'm always buoyed, being a lifetime educator, at how people pull together and band together in the face of tragedy, especially that which affects children and teachers. But in this particular case, it's the hope going forward, I think, that we all share, that the healing process will continue to take place. So if you'd share with all of us just a moment of silence. Thank you. I will now turn it over to Chair Root.
Thank you, Chancellor. Do we want to remind everybody to mute? Is that what? If I could get the attention of those that have called in, if you could put your phones on mute. There's a lot of background noise that we're hearing that's coming through the line.
Remind them.
Yeah, not on hold. We get your music that way, just on mute. With that important business out of the way, I want to thank all of you for being here. This is an exciting process that we're going to be going through, and the more I look into it, the more excited and overwhelmed I get at the same time. But before we call the meeting to order, there's a couple special guests that I'd like to recognize. First of all, President Saunders, thank you for your wonderful hospitality, and I don't know if you wanted to provide a welcome from the university.
From Florida Atlantic University. We're sitting on our Davie campus. This is the largest branch campus in the SUS system. We serve about 5,000 students here. A lot of these students are in 2+2 programs with Broward College. As the Chancellor said, this is a wonderful educational site shared by us and Nova Southeastern and Broward College, serving people on the Broward and Fort Lauderdale communities very, very well. 6 of our colleges offer courses and programs on this campus, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to be embedded in the Broward community. So we thank you for coming today. I, too, look forward to hearing this discussion, and we welcome you all, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to now recognize Chair Nunez. Representative Nunez, would you like to step forward and make a few comments? And let me give you a little bit more proper introduction. She is the chair of the House Higher Ed Workforce Committee, as well as a member of the Education Committee, and thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Governors. I appreciate the opportunity to come and listen to what is certainly going to be one of the more challenging items that we'll be addressing in the committee, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you as we delve into not only online education but higher education in general. And I look forward again to working with all of you, and thank you for the time and the effort that you all put into this, and I really do appreciate everything that you do for higher education in the state of Florida. And with that, happy holidays to each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Governor Rood, I realized in my remarks I did not recognize, Bob had been recognized by Frank Brogan, Bob Stilley, Chair of the FAU Board of Trustees. He's joined by Vice Chair Anthony Barber, so I want people to know that they're here and active participants in this dialogue.
Great. Thank you for being here. A few big comments, overviews. The legislature appropriated funds which were awarded to the Parthenon Group after a competitive bidding process. This workshop, the purpose of this workshop is to listen to their presentation so that we can discuss and evaluate our recommendations as a committee to the full board. The full board will then submit recommendations and alternatives to the legislature during this legislative session. And as I alluded to in the beginning, the more I look into this and the deeper that I dig, just the extent of the opportunity that we're faced with here is, becomes clear. And I think it's a real exciting time for the university system, for the state college system, for the private and the public institutions in the state to work together and to really take advantage of the support and the initiative shown by the speaker going forward. And I'm really looking forward to having something special come out of this process. So with that, I'd like to ask if Robert Little and Vanessa Webb would come forward and give us their overview. And this part of the agenda is going to last 1 hour. Let me also mention that we're going to keep going straight through this afternoon. We've got a packed schedule, so if people need to take a break, members, feel free to step out. And also, I want to remind everybody to turn their phones off so we don't have interruptions from cell phones. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. My name is Robert Lytle from the Parthenon Group, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. In the agenda, just one point of clarification, I am definitely not a doctor. That is a typo, much to the great disappointment of my grandmother. But, we all have to disappoint our grandmothers at one point or another, so I did that long ago. It is really a great pleasure, and I want to echo some of the earlier comments that were stated about the incredible opportunity in front of the state of Florida. At the Parthenon Group, we've been working with a number of universities, be they private institutions, for-profit, non-profit, state systems, around initiatives in online education. And typically, when I sit down with the board, one of the first things we have to do is actually define what online is, explain it to the board, show them a clip if necessary, and get them comfortable with the concept of digital technologies in the classroom, let alone outside of the classroom. I think one of the fantastic things about being in Florida is that's just not the case. The initiatives you guys have done down at the K-12 level, the initiatives you've done throughout the 39 colleges and universities here in the state have actually created a very, very robust online environment for the students in Florida. And so you're starting from an incredible position of strength. And what we want to talk about today is just some thoughts and perspectives and options of how to move forward to really take Florida spot in this world of online education as the leading system in the nation. Here we go. A couple of things, and I want to tick through this. I promise the entire presentation is not a series of bullet points on pages. It'll be a little more dynamic. But there's a couple very important points up here that I think I really want to set the stage with. Number one, there are 39 colleges and universities in the state, so no surprise there's some differing perspectives on what the primary objectives for online post-secondary education in Florida should be. The strategies that we're going to present here are our best attempt to encompass kind of the middle ground, the common points of view. But I think it would be, it would be incorrect of me to assert that there's a unified point of view on how to move forward in this area. Secondly, we're going to talk about a long-term post-secondary strategy, and it's not really intended to focus on any specific degree or specific program. This is more of a range of options of how to move forward. And obviously, underlying this is a real intent to say, you have hundreds of thousands of students online, you have 39 institutions out there. Everything we do is with an eye towards figuring out a way to bring the scale capability together so that you can have best-in-class business processes, the best online experience for your students, and do so at an acceptable delivery cost. So that's a thread that hopefully runs through everything in here. It's not about getting everybody online. It's about getting the state in a position to have the best online modality experience and the best processes underlying it. A little bit on where the data comes from. We pulled a lot of information on costs from the NCES data, which is loaded up into iPads. It's just a common way to pull information. Every time we present it, there's been questions about where some of that data comes from. And then, online learning is not a silver bullet. So we're not trying to lay out a modality that's the right modality for every learner in the state. Different programs and different modalities for different people. We'll show you as we go forward in here that online is definitely here to stay, and that it is a preferred or liked option by a significant portion of the students out there in the not just in the state of Florida but the nation as well. And then finally, what we'll run through here is we're going to present 4 options of how to move into an online world. And the one thing we want to ensure does not come across is that we believe one option is the right way to do things for all programs. You have a lot of, you've got undergraduate programs that are very robust right now. We'll talk about graduate degree programs. There's a range of them. And we don't want to leave the impression that you need to select one option and move forward with that option, and only that option is the way to implement online strategies across all of the programs and all the degree level offerings that you have. So I want to start with just some facts on online. If you just look back, and the left-hand side of this chart is a nationwide sample of online students. I will tell you that any number you ever see for the number of students in a fully online course is highly suspect. The data is simply not tracked that way at most universities, and it's not tracked that way at a national level. So you can see all sorts of competing numbers about how many students are online and how fast it's growing. The one common reality is that it's growing quite quickly. And so, just take it as a reasonable proxy here that over the last decade we've moved from about 10% of students taking an online course to about a third of students nationwide. And here in the state of Florida, actually about 40% of your students have taken at least one online course. You lead the nation in this respect. And I think, again, that's not a big surprise considering the investments you've put into it over the years and honestly the culture of online modality that you've started to install at the K-12 system as well. Second is that when we talk about online, we're going to talk about a number of different things, and I want to walk through this a little bit slowly. At one level, you have what we would label as online hybrid courses for campus-based students. This is a student who is going to a campus for the preponderance of their education, but might be taking 1 or 2 or 3 online courses during their time there. They might be doing it out of convenience. They might be doing it because they think it's actually a better modality for the particular course they're taking. But for whatever reason, they're taking a mixture of face-to-face and online instruction. That is where Florida is extremely strong right now, and that is actually an area where this is about the last time I'll talk about as we go through, because we're going to talk in our presentation about the next part, which is fully online degree programs. So fully online degree program is a student whose intent is to get their entire degree through an online modality. Now, people often question how much online. A typical definition for this is 80% or more. Certainly many of what we would label as online programs, right, so an online degree program in, say, education or business, may incorporate some element of face-to-face instruction. There's a lot of programs that are coming out that way where you say do 7 weeks online and you do 1 week in campus, or you get together 4 or 5 times during the period of your education. We would still consider that an online program because the intent behind it is to release the student from the necessity to travel to campus and take face-to-face instruction on a routine basis. So we use a general breakpoint. If about 80% of it's online, we're going to call it an online program. And in that area, you've really got 3 fundamental types of programs from our perspective. Number 1, you have undergraduate, certificate, or associate degree completion. Now, some certificate programs, people will do the entire thing online. We say degree completion, and you'll see we use that word as well with bachelor degree completion. The empirical evidence to date is that taking a student through an entire degree online at an undergraduate 4-year or 2-year is very, very challenging. The persistence rates and completion rates are very, very challenged at this point in time. That's not to say the modality can't get better over time, and we've actually only been at this for about 15 years, and that we can't get those persistence rates up. But today, most institutions look at the outcomes and say, I have questions about a fully online degree, but degree completion actually has very strong outputs. You notice that we said, these are things working primarily at adults who are looking to enhance their employment prospects or transition. When I get into bachelor's degree completions, it's often a working adult who never finished their degree program and wants to get the degree, less about transferring into a new job, but more about sustaining my career trajectory where it is. And you'll see on the right-hand side, requirements for success, and, generalities will always kill you, but we laid out some general requirements for success here, which is in an associate program, we say incoming students with about 20 or so credits. Now, that's not a hard line or anything, but it's the necessity that a student comes in with credits to complete that degree. And again, these are fully online programs. Another one you'll see in there is continuous starts and competency options. When you move into particularly undergraduate online education, you find that as a student, it's often an adult who, for whatever reason, is no longer linked up with academic cycles. So starts that happen 3 or 4 times a year just don't fit into their lifestyle and into what they're trying to achieve. And that's why you'll see virtually all successful offerings in that area run at least on a continuous start. So it might be monthly, it might be twice monthly, but it's detached from the traditional campus cycle. And then the final one is into graduate degree programs. I won't show you the data in here, but we recently ran a survey with young men and women in the country who are looking to go to graduate school. And what actually blew us away is that at this point in time, they're very, very comfortable with online as a modality. And the survey we ran actually indicated that they preferred an online experience to a campus-based experience. So that was their preferred option. So it's very, very accepted out there in the world. And you'll find in graduate degrees, we'll show you some data, the pace with which those programs are coming online is somewhat stunning. Here you typically have a student who's more self-directed in their capability to move through. They've already successfully completed education to date. And you can actually run programs with a lighter touch in the background in terms of student support services and things like that. And the final point on that, and I think it's with all of them, is all of these degrees, particularly in the online space, tend to be very highly aligned with labor markets in the areas you are. And frankly, when they're not aligned with labor markets, they start to run into some real problems in terms of both outcomes for students, because students can't continue in their career, or just in terms of the ability to recruit students into the programs. So that's the area we're going to talk about most. Down at the bottom, we have a little parking lot here for what we're calling self-directed courses, or MOOC-inspired, the massively online open courses. This is a concept of really stripping virtually all of the cost out of the delivery of education. Very asynchronous. It's really, it's almost like it's a textbook 4.0, right? It's a very, very robust courseware, but virtually no instructional support in the background. And we lay that out there because many states and systems now are really starting to think about how can I take a really high quality MOOC, if you will, and put an assessment at the back end of it and actually award credits. And I think that's something that's on the agenda. It's on the agenda in many university systems. It's on the agenda in a couple state houses around the nation. And it's one that we didn't want to lose track of, but we'll spend less time on that. Secondly is, we went around and tried to gain a perspective on what are the objectives, the primary objectives that the colleges and universities have for really pushing online, particularly into the fully online degree programs. We have 4 of them laid out here, and the first one is expanding access, right? So really making sure that students or young men and women, or middle-aged men and women for that matter, throughout the state have access to a program that works for them, both in terms of the type of degree they're looking for, but also their ability to actually get there and complete the education. So this concept of expanding access was very, very prominent in the folks that we talked to. The second one is reducing system and student costs. Now, the one thing I will say is typically when we're talking with other universities out there, that one up in the right-hand corner is usually defined as institutional sustainability, which means I'm looking at this as a revenue source or a surplus source. In the state of Florida, it was really expressed to us as reducing the system and student costs. Right, so how can I get a degree program that actually has a lower delivery cost that allows us to continue moving forward? The third one down there is strengthening the link between the labor market and post-secondary education. So saying, very explicitly, I want to look at the online modality, particularly in fully online degrees, and really ensure that it's aligned with the jobs that are both here in the state and the direction that we think the economy is moving in. So we actually have an educated workforce that can fulfill those labor market needs. And then the final one is enhancing the student experience. I always feel compelled to use one of my partner Seth Reynolds' quotes, which is, let's not over-romanticize the undergraduate experience often. That, in many cases, not all classes are as fantastic as they actually, we like to believe they are or could be. And actually really high-quality digital solutions can be a real powerful ally in ensuring that every student has a great experience in their undergraduate or graduate. So this concept of really enhancing, so if we're going to do it, let's do it right. And I think that was an undercurrent that really ran through all the discussions we had throughout the state. So what do you have right now? Today, you offer about 700 online programs. Now, I'm going to say about. The data's not tracked that well. It's not the way the systems were designed. The data is captured. And while in many instances it's theoretically possible for a student in Florida to go through and get their entire degree online, it's not typically packaged and presented that way. it's typically packaged and presented as, you are on my campus, you happen to be taking online courses. And I don't, again, generalities will kill you, so this is a bit of my Icarus moment here, but there are a few instances where people actually have put together very clear and distinct programmatic offerings that are purely online, and you can see those in the marketplace, and students are coming for that. But as a general statement, that's not how online is being approached in the state of Florida today. Today, it's much more of a, you are a member of my campus, you may be taking some or all of your courses online. In fact, when we went into the data and looked and said, how many students last year only took online courses? It was actually a pretty big number, and we said, wow, we're onto something. And we said, let's look back one more year. Right? When we looked back one more year and said, how many students have taken at least all their courses online 2 years in a row, the answer was 19,000. So I'd hypothesize as that we move further and further back, that number gets smaller and smaller. And the reason that's so critical is that when I look around, the independent colleges have about 220 programs. I'll show you later. We think it's around 30,000 students in purely online programs, right? So when you package it together and you present it, it really gets market acceptance out there. And then the for-profit institutions across the state offer about 850 different programs and have a huge student body, obviously, in fully online programs. The other question we asked, when you look out at the data across the nation, you typically see that the online student is a little bit older, is more of a working adult than the campus-based student. And you'll see that in the data that flowed out of the Florida situation, you see the same thing, where the universities, the majority of the students who are online are 25 older, and the Florida college system, a little more of a bias towards younger students, but that makes sense given where they are in the marketplace and the type of student body they're trying to get. But still, a significant portion of their students are actually working adults as well. So what does it cost to do things online? As we move to that second part of reducing the system and student cost. Two facts become very clear when you start talking about costs and online. First is, you can have just about any cost structure you want, right? So it's all about how much instructional support and student service support and marketing you put into the program. So there's no clear definition of it. The other thing that comes out is you can actually do online really cheaply if you choose to. It's just not typically a very good experience for the student. It's not a high quality. So we tried to build out, based on a lot of benchmarks out in the marketplace, and we've worked with a number of universities and college and their online strategies, what we would say are 4 reasonably robust different flavors of online education and put the cost behind them. I'll start on the left, which is more of what we called it a credit-based, but it's essentially an attempt to take the campus-based experience and move it online. So you're talking about student-faculty ratios of about 18:1. Typically, when you get up in size, you find class sizes of around 25 to 30 students. A decent amount of interaction between the professor and the students, right? Very strong student supports in the background, decent marketing, all of that, right? And so when you stand all that up and say, what does that cost typically on an ongoing run rate basis? The answer is about $10,000 to $12,000 per annum for a full-time student, right? You can break that down into credit hours, dollars, but that's, for an FTE student and online, the delivery cost at scale is about $10,000 to $12,000. But that's not the right online offering for all students, right? Many students are actually actively seeking something slightly different. So the next one over, which we label as competency-based. There's a lot of offerings in the online space that are built more around demonstrating competencies, and as a result, what comes from them is you have less instructional support time, right? So my instructor moves from having more of that direct instruction with students to a more coaching model in the background, right? And obviously the ratios go up, the cost starts to fall. Typically, students who can succeed well in a competency-based environment also require less student support services, right? So I can have a lower student support service cost. Again, not the right model for everybody, but for those adults that does work for, it's a very successful model. And you can see the cost structure for delivery on that starts to come down into that $5,000 to $7,000 range. If I move a little further to the right and get into, kind of undergraduate and associate type of benchmarks, usually my credit-based is a little cheaper. It's a little cheaper in most of the benchmark situations because my class ratios are different, and importantly, my faculty is very much a teaching faculty. So my faculty teaching load, my classes may still be a nice small size, but the teaching load of the faculty member starts to go up, right? This is an undergraduate, it's a teaching-focused degree program. And then if the competency-based one falls as well. So again, I don't want to lay these out as hard, fast, and true numbers, but they do represent reasonably accurate delivery costs for different models of delivery that are out there in the landscape. The next part is strengthening this link between labor markets and post-secondary. Very interesting. The chart on the left is the openings in the EFI target industry within the state of Florida. And then what we did is we just crosswalked those job degrees back to the SIS codes, right? So the codes that are used to, when you look at a degree program and say, where do students in this degree program be employed, we just crosswalk that. And then we went out and we did a very simple exercise of looking around the nation and saying, does somebody offer that degree in a fully online modality or not, right? And the answer is out of 28 some odd thousand programs, or some the programs out there under the life sciences, you can see roughly, I'm eyeballing that, is about 80%. About 80% of the programs out there somewhere in the nation are offered fully online. We were actually reasonably surprised by this, and we've done this now a few more times in other areas, and what it's really starting to tell us is that for most, even of the knowledge-based worker economy that people are trying to drive towards, most of the degrees that will allow you entry into that, you could actually take online if you so chose. That somewhere somebody has figured out a way to take that program and make an online offering out of it. And I think it demonstrates the ability to link these towards the labor markets and then pull students through either through campus, a hybrid, or an online degree offering. Mm-hmm. Do we do 2 or 3? So we did 4? Yeah, we can tell you specifically. And then enhancing the student experience. I think we showed you earlier about 40% of students are enrolled in online courses. It's shocking. We just are doing some work with a, I guess you call it top 30 global research institution, thinking through their online strategy. Very elite residential experience. About 18% of their students are taking their undergraduate courses, or 18% of their undergraduate courses are being taken online. And when you go in and you look at what course it was, it starts to make a lot of sense. It's the courses that weren't really all that great in the residential experience. So you see throughout the nation students voting with their feet around online modality, not for all of their courses, but for very certain and specific ones. So as you look around the nation and think about online, we would assert that when you think online, you need to break it down into major business activities. And so if I take these chevrons at the top of the chart here, there is an element of how am I going to design the program? How am I going to market the program to students and handle inquiries about the program? How will I start a student in an online experience? Online is different than on campus, right? So I have to think through the differences of how I onboard the student and how I provide the student support services throughout, because there isn't anybody at campus to kind of look them in the face and intervene at various times. How do I manage the course scheduling online? That actually becomes very, very important, not just in terms of timing, but also in terms of making sure my classes are filled appropriately, not overfilled, not underfilled. How do I actually drive the instruction? The instructional model for most faculty at scale online institutions is different than the instructional faculty model at traditional campus-based programs. And so my instructors become more teaching faculty in a scale online program than they do other things. And then finally at the back end, how do I handle the data analytics and the IT infrastructure? The online world is truly an area where big data is important, and very, very good systems and process control and monitoring is crucial to success. And without that, actually, your program typically fails in a reasonably short amount of time. And then if I think about those, those 4 objectives of expanding access down to enhancing the student learning, we tried to just lay out some very high-level examples of the, best practices that have emerged out there. Online's only about 15, 20 years old. It's really only been at scale for less than a decade, so I think you can accept very much that it's still in its infancy and still getting better and better. And the nice thing is there's lots of experiments and lots of research being driven into it now, and so you can start to look at the business models people deploy and really kind of inform the choices you make as you set up systems. So what's going on today? 38 of the 39 current institutions have online programs. Polytech doesn't yet. And I'll assume that it'll probably be 40 in the near future. So you have built up a very, very robust online infrastructure out there. And you did so over actually a reasonably short period of time. As we move forward and think about how can we start to harness the power that's in scale, right? And so not necessarily only for the cost, right? Not just to drive the cost down, but to make sure that everything we're doing in an online environment is actually a best-in-class business process. we sat down and we laid out kind of 4 different options for how people have done this in different parts of the nation. And again, I want to stress, one of these columns is not the right solution for everything we do. You might manage your undergraduate hybrid courses very differently than you manage a business degree program at the MBA level or an engineering program, and a different way that you might think about handling kind of very, very low-cost MOOC-inspired types of courses. But as we looked around the nation and looked at how other systems have done this, we really saw 4 reasonably generic methodologies coming out. First is what we labeled institution by institution. That's what you've done to date, right? Institutions, on their own initiative, harnessing the power of creativity, develop online programs and grow those online programs over time. It's pretty straightforward, and it's really controlled at the different institutions, right? It's a very powerful way to get things up and running, and virtually everybody that we've worked with in online strategies started there, right? Some dean or some president somewhere said, we're going to go online, and they did it. And that's the situation you have here in Florida. And that's something that you could continue to manage it that way. And you've got structures in place, and it would be just about making sure that you feel that those structures are both enabling the creativity, but also putting the supports in place to harness some of the scale opportunities you'd like to achieve. The next one, institutional collaboration, we would define as kind of taking that, harnessing that energy of the individual institutions, but getting together and putting some very clear guidelines around certain business activities that you want to do at scale in, I'm going to use the dreaded word, a more centralized fashion. You could use just about any form of governance body on that you wanted. So we listed as examples, you could use the FLVC, you could use the Board of Governors, you could use the DOA, you could invent a new one. But it's to put a governing body in place, or a body in place that all the institutions say, we are going to collaboratively work together, but when it comes to certain things, and I don't know what they are, maybe it's call centers, or maybe it's student support services, or maybe it's courseware development, these are areas that we actually only want to do in 1 or 2 locations that we can really get scale, and we will collectively agree to give up individual, the individual control we have over that in order to get the group whole. And we would call that institutional collaboration. The third one here, which we've called lead institution, I think the word lead gets us in trouble all the time, is to say what I really want to do is I want to build scale around 1 or 2 of the colleges or universities in a particular area. And what I'm likely to do is to bid that out in an RFP type of process. To kind of bring this to light, if I was thinking we really want to have a great MBA program in a fully online modality, right, that's applicable to the entire state. What you might do in situation 3 is to get together and actually issue an RFP to the various schools and universities and say, here are the requirements that we're looking for, both in terms of the selectivity, in terms of the programmatic offerings we're looking for, the scale that we're looking for, the cost structure that we're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. Come back and tell us how you might do that. You might do it on your own. You might do it in concert with 1 or 2 other institutions. You might do it in concert with a third party. But to take the power and say, we only want to do this at scale 1 time, and RFP it out and let one group of institutions really propose, this is the way we would propose to offer it, and award that out in that manner. Right? So, and this has been a successful strategy in some areas, and I think it's all about which one fits the context correct. And then the fourth one, of course, is to say I'm going to do a new online institution. Colorado State University essentially has just recently done that by taking what was the site of Colorado State and spinning it out. It's now its own accredited body. But to stand up an entirely new university that's focused exclusively on the online experience. None of these is the best choice or the worst choice, I think. It's really about each one has some pros and cons, and we'll walk you through those as we go forward. Each one has strengths, and each one fits, I think, the context of your situation differently. So the choices here, I think, are just to be very aware of if I do X or I do Y, what I gain, what I lose, and then come to the conclusion of what fits Florida the best. So again, I want to come back. We're going to talk, and the data I'm going to take you through now, or the perspectives, is about fully online degree programs, so not the current offerings you have in the hybrid types of programs, but those, undergraduate degree completion programs or graduate degree programs. If I go through on institution by institution, I think I hit a good bit of this. Drive their own strategy in accordance with their mission, fosters the innovation that's out there. Two big weaknesses that come out of there. It's very hard to capture scale economics there, so you're trading innovation off for scale, right? So that's a very clear trade-off that you make. And the other one is that when I think about reaching all of the labor market needs that I want, each institution risks optimizing its mission, but collectively not optimizing the mission of the state as a whole. So if you went with option one from our perspective, you would really need to make sure that in the background you have some methodology to sit back and say, hey, wait, collectively we're not covering the following degree programs or the following types of potential students out there that we want to do. You need some fail-safe mechanism in the background. That's probably one of the bigger weaknesses when we think about evaluating against the 4 criteria we laid out. If I think about institutional collaboration, done right, this can be very powerful in reducing the duplication of effort, right? Institutions come together and essentially say, you'll be the center of excellence on this, you'll be the center of excellence on this, and you'll be the center of excellence on this. Done correctly, that can be very powerful in making sure we don't duplicate effort and that we pick the business processes that are most important and get scale behind them. It can be very inclusive and coordinated. It can allow you to still tap into that innovative energy that's out there. The challenge, obviously, is that you run the risk of no clear owner of the results, right? So you really have to embody that collective body to drive that. And it can be very difficult to make adjustments quickly, right? The downside of 39 institutions coming together with 39 missions is it's a slower process. There's no way to deny that. But, still a very, very viable thing. If we go to the lead institution, almost by definition, is if we're RFPing out programs to 1 or 2 institutions, the ability to build scale business processes is there. So you can capture that scale reasonably straightforward. You can really leverage your existing brand strength. So I think there's a slightly alternative point of view that says Florida is actually the core brand here, right, when I start talking about online modalities. And as long as it's coordinated across that could be overcome. The downside is that, if you didn't get selected, you're kind of shut out of that, and that can be very difficult to manage through, very independent and powerful and successful institutions. And, you do absolutely run the risk of stifling innovation, right? You're going all in to get the scale benefits, but the risk, of course, is you don't get the innovation that comes from having a lot of people participate. So real pros and cons there. If I move over to the very far right, I think on the strengths, a lot of them are pretty obvious. On the weakness, actually, you're starting a new brand, and though Florida may be the core brand, brand is important when we start talking about going online, and you would, of course, be dealing with a university that starts on day 0 without a brand, without a presence in the marketplace. And I absolutely would not underestimate the complexity of starting a new institution. And not listed on there, your speed to market gets slowed down, right? You don't just create a new online, accredited institution overnight. It's actually a reasonably detailed, long process, and you're just extending the time frame with which you could be in the marketplace reasonably significantly on that one. So let's talk a little bit about costs, and I'm going to hit a few slides on costs, and I don't want to leave the impression that our perspective is do this to achieve cost economics. It's really about all the things, but the cost is important. When we think about startup costs, we tried to put together a pro forma, if you will, for what would it cost to start this up at scale across the various options. And we've tried to create an environment where you would have the money to do this extremely well. So you'll notice as you go across there, the difference between institution by institution or collaboration or lead institution is a little different. And the differences should be apparent in the way you're doing it. If I go with institution by institution, we have to presume that our program design costs will be higher than if we did it in a more coordinated fashion. More people are designing more programs. That's where you get the innovation. It comes with the cost structure there. The second one is in brand building. Again, we presume that if you go with a lead institution, you can get your money behind one brand quickly, and that's more efficient in terms of marketing. If I go with institutional collaboration or institution by institution, the reality is I'm spending money behind all of the brands simultaneously. And even in an online modality, even with established brands, there's a reasonable amount of marketing that has to happen in order to make them successful. So I lose a little bit of efficiency there. And then finally, we assume that on a new online institution, I've got to build a brand from scratch, and that has some real cost implications to it. Yeah, please.
Interrupt the presentation, but if we're looking at, for instance, institution by institution, which is what we're doing now, right? Is that $50 million that you're talking about, $50 million new, or is that incorporating what we're already spending in the process? If we do nothing, we're going to spend $45 to $50 million, or are you overlaying a $45 to $50 million on top of what we're already spending?
So we're saying that if you do this right, we expect it would cost 45 to 50 million. Whether you layer that on top or you reduce expenditure in other areas, I'll leave up to you to decide. But to really, and we're talking about standing up a whole bunch of programs, very high quality, and marketing them. Yeah, it costs real money.
So, but again, is that 45 to 50 million more than what we're spending
Yes.
right now?
Yes. Yes.
And if we were to do that option, I presume you've got some projections on how many more students we would then add into that pool, and you'll get to those
Absolutely.
later
So
on?
we'll walk through that in a little bit.
Okay.
There's obviously
I
the
just-
cost and there's a benefit side to it, right? So
I-
absolutely.
Is there a we don't change anything chart somewhere that lets us know what happens?
I don't think we did a status quo, did we?
Okay, I just
Yeah. Two other areas that you'll see on here are information technology and facilities. In the lead institution, while I acknowledge that if you select one of the institutions, they might have the facilities available and you wouldn't have to expend, we accounted for it anyway. Right? I think it's a fully loaded cost. You should expect that that gets accounted for. And then on information technology, again, we presume, and it may be a false presumption, we presume if we go institution by institution or lead institution, we wouldn't make discrete massive investments exclusively in institution by institution EIT. We would presume that in a lead institution, the person who responds to the RFP already has the systems in place to handle the online modality. And if we go to collaboration or a new online institution, we'd have to do some real investments in order to get the systems up to pace. When I think about recurring expenditures, I'd laid those out to you earlier in the presentation around that $10,000 to $12,000. All we've attempted to do here is to handicap recurring expenditures between the different options. And you'll see in general we put the institution by institution as a more expensive delivery mode. You're duplicating effort by definition in a number of places. And we put strategies 3 and 4 as probably the lowest cost. But again, you'll see that those aren't draconianly different cost structures. Where it's the most noticeable is in what we would call that credit base and that 10 to 12. If I go institution, I float to the top side. If I really go for scale efficiencies, I bring it down to the lower side on that.
Can I ask a question? The numbers you gave were $10,000 to $12,000 to do it the right way, and that's the marginal cost of the next student once you do it.
That's right.
We currently charge $6,500. So what you're saying, if we do this right, it'll take a significant appropriation from the state over and above what the current tuition charges are for a traditional college education.
If you get more students, absolutely. If you're going to charge tuition below your cost base and you're going to drive more students through the system, there's a real cost associated with that. We'll show you in a bit, we believe there's a way to actually work this to be reasonably efficient. And that's a combination of not everybody needs to take what we would call credit-based courses on the left-hand side. You should have many students taking from the competency-based and from the ones over to the right in the associates area. So you actually, some students are very expensive, some students aren't, and the mix is actually quite important. And secondly, you have the opportunity to have out-of-state students as well, where you can charge a different tuition level.
let me interrupt one more time, and God knows I hate when my presentation's interrupted, so I'll apologize in advance. Actually, I hate being interrupted generally, but we've said 3 times now, if you're going to do it right. Are we doing it wrong? Is there something wrong with what we're doing now, and what would that be that we would need to correct?
No, I don't think we could say that you're doing it wrong. I say you're doing it in 39 different ways. And I could say I feel reasonably comfortable that we're not doing it in the most cost-efficient manner, and we're probably not achieving world-class processes and world-class outcomes in every program on every campus that's being done, right?
I don't know if this helps, but we work in this environment. We had trouble defining, even counting the number of online students you all have. So those numbers don't really exist, and that's not uncommon. But what that means is when a student comes in and they're an online student, they're not recorded that way, and they need to be onboarded differently. They need different support services. They're not interacting with the teacher. You need the data analytics. Who's watching them every day? Who's watching their activity? So in terms of, are they doing their work? Are they taking their tests? What's happening with their grades? you need to be monitoring that all the time. Online is very different. They're not walking into a classroom. And if you're lacking the data, even on the overall online, it makes it challenging right now to figure out who are those students, and then what different services do we need to be giving them. So this is not all to say you all have a great baseline, but there are a lot more supports for these online students and a different way of approaching it that needs to be part of it.
And is there a difference there between a student taking one course or a student taking their whole degree?
Huge difference.
There is, enormous. Because the residential student who's a junior and taking it in their dorm room, they're walking into the classroom, if they're in the dorm, but what about the student who's in their room or working? How do you know? You've got to actually be monitoring their grades every day. I mean, the sophistication nowadays, people map the counselors to the personality of the counselor to the personality of the student. And I mean, persistence, as we all know, is still more challenging in online. And so you need the infrastructure, the data analytics, what works, what doesn't, what do we need to change in our program next year, how do we change the homework, what are they interacting with? There's a lot that goes into it, and I don't think we're saying Florida does it badly. Florida's doing some great things. All we're saying is there are opportunities to do more and to help these students. There are a lot of students in Florida who are taking online courses outside of the public system, and you all could be serving more of them if they knew about it, so others are marketing more. And if you provided them with the supports, but you all are starting far from ground zero. You're at a great
and I was
spot.
just trying to get a baseline on what $50 million buys.
Yeah.
That's
So
all.
it's letting them know. You need to, there are others who do a better job of letting them know that they're the programs, but it's also it's creating these programs that are for these types of students, and they're different than the residential student who wants to take a few courses online.
So let me walk through, what do we think this could look like over time? And I think Vanessa's point is right. Your system is really primarily built around a campus-based student who's also taking online courses. We're talking about fully online degree programs, and we're actually talking about driving to 20, 30,000 some odd students in fully online programs, right, over a sustained period of time. When we get into that and we start to think about, okay, what do you get, right, for roughly a $40, $50 million investment? It is difficult to stand in front of you and say I can be this precise about 10 years in the future, but we took a stab at it. But we think it's not unreasonable to say that over that time frame that you could look at getting between 25 and 75 some odd thousand completions, so new degree holders over that period of time. On an ongoing basis over that, you would spend an awful lot of money, right? So it's mind-boggling numbers of $1 billion or so in ongoing costs, but that's based on the number of students that are obviously running through the system. We think that, if you think about and follow those models, that your expenditure per BA credit in year 10 is going to be at roughly the levels you see here. And we lay these out because, each of these different pathways you go down has clear implications in terms of how big you can get, implications in terms of what the cost structure is going to look like, and then finally we lay in what we think the graduation rate would look like, and then very importantly on the back end, what we think the expenditure per completion is. We're big fans of saying at the end of the day, I'm investing money in order to get completions out of universities and colleges, not just the experience. I'm looking for graduates. And so we're trying to get a proxy for what we think the cost per completion is. That cost per completion is very much predicated on the graduation rate, the persistence rate. And so, it's really that expenditure per credit times the credits needed divided by the graduation rate that gets you there. I want to walk through why a couple of these numbers from our perspective are so different. And in the detailed materials, there's a very detailed breakdown of how we get there. An institution by institution, we handicap that in terms of the number of students or the growth rate you can get compared to the other ones, because we don't see the ability to get the coordinated marketing and the coordinating offering degrees as strongly there. We think once you start to get strongly coordinated, you move more into option 2. And then we handicap option 1 in terms of graduation rates. Graduation rates online are about 10%, or persistence rates are about 10% lower on average. It's, every program is different, every institution is different, but they're generally about 10% lower. And we felt an institution by institution, we wouldn't have the investment behind the data systems, the student supports, and the improvements in terms of the course development and course delivery in order to really drive closure on that gap, which is what many people out there are trying to do. Driving closure of the gap in persistence in online is a big thrust. So those are two big handicaps on that side, and that's why we think that both the total number of completions and the expenditure per completion is lower. If I come to option 2, we actually gave that a reasonably good ramp-up time and decent completions over time, but not quite as much as we did behind lead institution or the pacing on a new online institution, where we think, again, the ability to put the marketing dollars and the focus behind one or two really scaled programs gives you some advantages. And then on the graduation rate, we felt that in institutional collaboration, you would be able to make investments in data, in systems, and support services, in courseware development, but probably not to the extent to close that persistence gap as you could in options 3 and options 4. Option 3 is, probably has the ability to drive the largest enrollments, and keep in mind we're doing this without knowing exactly which program, so we're modeling those of us to other institutions that have made a coordinated approach to the marketplace. And then finally, the new online institution we actually think ramps up very much like a lead institution. The problem is it's about 18 months delayed because it takes time to get accreditation. It's very hard to build your program scale without having accreditation. They tend to be very, very small for those first year and a half or 2 years until you get it moving. And so that doesn't reflect the ultimate pathway we think you go on, but just the reality of how quickly it can ramp up in the short term. So I want to pause there because there's a lot of numbers on the page. Make sure there's any questions just on the specifics of that or clarification I can provide.
May I ask this question?
Sure. Joe?
Could you talk just a little bit about your column 4, which I find very counterintuitive? Why starting a new online institution seems to have a tremendous amount of overhead in terms of expense and getting it up and running, and yet in the end, you're saying it has the same expenditure per BA completion and per BA credit. To me, it's very counterintuitive. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because I'm not counting, this is on my ongoing costs, so I'm not counting my initial investment, right? So I've taken that out, so it's not a pure ROI. This is just saying for my recurring costs.
I see.
So it's not counting that initial. And actually, we believe once I get to scale, the overhead gets swallowed up. And in fairness, if I was going to really drive on lead or institutional collaboration, I have to have that scale and overhead as well, right? So I still have to have the student support services and all. So those types of things really kind of get replicated. It's a reasonably thin layer of administration that sits on top that's a true duplication, and it gets washed out over time.
Okay.
Deed?
On the lead institution model, do you envision that being an open access type admissions process that is, and then how does that affect that university's, all the other things that university is looking at in terms of, student-faculty ratio? Are you able to take this online product and say, we're going to move it over here and we're going to deal with it separately, and the university's not, in its other rankings that they concern themselves with, won't be impacted by those?
Yeah, great question. Not necessarily open access, but in order to achieve the student scale that we're talking about here, it has to be a reasonably low admission bar, right? So not open access, but you can't have it too elite, or you're going to fail on some of your criteria from earlier about access, linkages to the labor market, et cetera. I think
That could be done with partnership.
Yeah.
So you could have one institution who has their admission standards, and they could partner with others who have different ones. They could say, we'll design a course, this college, this university, you also administer that course.
Hey, Vanessa. Got to get on the mic.
Well, you do that. So we don't hurt any feelings here. Let's say we're at Michigan, and the University of Michigan is the premier institution in Michigan, and they're going to become now the lead institution in Michigan Online, which I guess what you would talk about is one of our universities would be the lead institution in Florida online learning. Are they able to separate that out? Are they able to use the same accreditation umbrella?
I could address some of those questions if you'd like me to. The creditors, SACS, the Southern Association of Crediting Body, expects that essentially online students who are in the same degree program be treated as the residential students are, so in terms of student learning outcomes, standards, et cetera. So I think that would be an issue. Any student that you admit as a freshman in the fall, summer or fall class gets counted in the cohort for purposes of reporting statistics. And to my knowledge, you cannot, under current SACS rules, separate them. The other thing that would be worth pointing out is we have a lot of regulations on the books, both BOG regulations and statutory regulations about admissions to university programs. And so I think we'd have to
So,
take
as an
notice
example,
of
then, that
those.
would mean University of Michigan, Ann Arbor would tell you, we can't take this role, we can't assume the role of lead institution because we're not willing to change our admission standards enough because it impacts the university in other places.
That is conceivable.
Yeah, so
You
let me,
agree with that?
well, yes and no. Let me break it down a little bit. Remember, in the undergraduate arena, we're looking at degree completions, so not starting as a freshman. We're looking at a transfer student. And your transfer requirement rules are actually pretty much in line with what most online operations would say is the requirement for success. So I think when you actually break it down and look at how would I do a degree completion program, when you really dig up underneath it, you're going to say, actually, the transfer requirements that we have in place are pretty much the ones we would want to have even if we had no restrictions, just to ensure that we're going to have the right outcomes. So, our perspective is you're probably fine there. When it comes to graduate degree programs, that's where you start to run into some issues. It would be very, very difficult for, like at Michigan's business school to go online and service all of Michigan. Okay, so then maybe they're not the lead institution for that, or maybe they have to partner with another university if they choose to do that. Because I think when you start to look at the graduate degree programs, it is fantastic, by the way, to have a very, prestigious, high admissions bar graduate program for a very subset of students within the state or outside of the state. But if you really want to achieve those first four objectives we laid out, you have to have admissions criteria that allows the preponderance of students to enjoy the modality. And I think there you would say, in the RFP, if you put it out, you would have to say, here's the admission criteria we're seeking in this graduate program. If at your institution you wish to bid to be the lead, and you want to keep your admission criteria, you're going to have a partner in order to do that within their institution. That's the only way you can achieve, I think, the objectives that you're looking for.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm sorry, John, let me
Why don't we
apologize.
let him finish up? He's got 10 minutes.
Okay, it's just an assumption
Okay.
question, that's all. Because we will all tend to look at this chart and look at the very bottom of expense per BA, and notwithstanding all of your disclaimers about I can't see into the future 10 years, I get that. How do we get to 25,000 completed degrees on an institution-by-institution basis, and a lead institution is 3x that number? Is that pure marketing? And
Two
can we
things.
just invest more in marketing institution by institution and save some money?
I think we have you investing roughly the same. It's just your marketing is more efficient behind one institution because it's one message driving to one inquiry source. Second is persistence rate difference. I don't want to underestimate. You start looking at closing a 10-point persistence rate gap over time, and that starts to have a big impact on completions. So those are the two primary assumptions. We assume the marketing's more efficient dollar for dollar in options 3 and 4, less efficient in options 1 and 2. Finally, as you think about these options, the one thing I wanted to add at the tail end of this is to say there's a very sophisticated network of partners out there that can partner with you to take on some of these business activities.
I'd like to hear about that after your presentation.
Sure.
Such as Colorado Tech, which I know a lot about, since is for-profit.
Yep.
What kind of partnership could we do with a school system like that or any place else?
Right.
To design a brand-new online institution with a partnership with a university or a system that's for-profit,
Right.
so both ends are helped.
Yeah, so as I said, very sophisticated network of partners out there that can do anything from what we label as online enabler, which you as an institution go to them and say, we want you to be our partner in standing up our online degree programs. And they will take on, if you wish, a substantial portion of the courseware development, the marketing, the student supports, et cetera. And typically they do that on a revenue share line, right? So they say the contract is, I'm going to front the capital, I'm going to do a lot of the business activities, I'm compensated on a share line. And the contracts look like that whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit institution providing those services. Or you can break it down and say, actually, there's spot pieces in here which we don't want to do on our own. We'd rather use a partner. I can go and have somebody do my marketing services for me. I can have somebody develop my assessments for me. I can have somebody, do student support services. But the point is no matter which option you choose, once you start to break it down and say, how am I actually tactically going to execute on it, there's actually a lot of options out there other than doing it on your own, and a big, big network of them. And then finally, at risk, the ubiquitous Harvey balls or moon balls at the end. The coloring, how full they are always looks a little bit sophomoric. There was actually a tremendous amount of thought process that went behind this with a number of people across the state of Florida. But what we try to do here is just go in and say, from a very objective basis for each of these options, how well does it perform on the top against those criteria around expanding access, enhancing the student experience, right? So if I went with that option, am I setting myself up to really excel on one of those dimensions or not? And then down below is just a lot of what I would call just very real-world considerations, right? So some of these are easier from an accreditation process than others. Standing up a new university is a lot of work from an accreditation standpoint. Some of them are, how difficult is this to implement, right? So, there is the reality of how do I get moving in a different direction with 39 institutions. If I go with option one, it's actually relatively easy. It's very similar to what we're doing today. If I go with a whole new university, I've really changed directions, and there's a lot of just difficulty in the implementation under there. How well does it leverage the brand strength? How well does it set us up for developing and continuing to execute against best-in-class business processes? And then finally, just in terms of speed to the market, how quickly can I get into the marketplace and really have my degree programs out there and ready to go at scale across the various options? So with that, I'll pause, and any questions I can entertain now, and I think I'm pretty close to the end of my time block.
You're 7 minutes ahead. Congratulations.
That's pretty good for me.
Tico, I'm sure you have some additional questions or comments.
No, I interrupted when I saw fit.
That's okay. Apparently it's my dissertation defense today. So
Governors, any thoughts? Yes, Pat?
No, I just want to later possibly talk about partnerships with for-profit institutions, if we do go the route of a new online institution. I would like to hear if they've done any analysis at all. It would save us $70 million or $40 million. We could still share the profits. Kids would be able to get a degree, etc.
Yeah, we have two more individuals that are going to
Right.
discuss this, and then after the panel, we'll have 30 minutes that we can have a discussion as well. I had one question, and I keep getting hung up on credit-based, competency-based, and I'm sure I missed it somewhere, but I'm assuming your figures here are all based on a credit-based model?
They are. It's a bit of a misnomer. So everything is designed to be able to award credits, obviously, at the end. We probably should have called it Carnegie unit-based versus competency-based, but somehow the term credit-based got embedded in the lexicon. But all of these, the intent would be obviously, whether I'm doing it on a competency-based or coaching, that at the end of the day, the students are receiving accredited credits, if you will, towards a degree program.
Good. Yes.
In your discussion on the four options, you had at the bottom, institutions could continue to operate independently.
Mm-hmm.
What are the restrictions you're envisioning by the lead institution model?
So the concept behind the lead institution model is frankly to say, if I'm going to make a large investment between big online programs, I only want to do it in one spot. I'll leave it to this body to decide how you want to think about other schools doing things, but the reality is you have a lot of schools with online programs, and it would feel difficult to retract from them. It's more about where are you putting your future investment dollars to achieve scale.
I'm intrigued by all this. I actually watched this morning the opening lecture of a biology class at Stanford University. And it was 1967 the last time I took biology. And I didn't do well in it. I was stunned by how good it was, how good the lecture was. And I want to assume that this guy is a star, and he's one of the, and he is a star. He's a real star. But it seems to me, and part of all this is in designing the curriculum for online learning, shouldn't one of the things we'd be interested in is how do we incorporate the best biology teacher in America, and I know there's not just one, but one of the best biology teachers' lectures into our curriculum, and not just limit ourselves to the adjuncts that may be teaching because we've cut our funding so much.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about a really great online experience, it will typically, from a lecture perspective, try to capture the best in the field, not just the best from a research and reputation standpoint, but also communication standpoint.
Right.
But then, importantly, really surround it with a lot of other things. Adaptive technology, homework solutions, the ability to drill in and get into modeling and things like that. And then in the background, have instructional support. And that instructional support is typically not lecture-based, right? I'm allowing the asynchronous digital product to do the lecture-based, but it's really around discussion and engagement and facilitating the learning. That's the instructional support you have in the background. It's difficult to digitize that. And in fact, as you lower that and you get down to the extreme, and you were probably watching one of the MOOCs, the massively open online courses. In that case, there is no instructional support in the background, right? Some of these courses, the MOOC courses, literally have 100,000 students. There's no instructional support happening with 100,000 students and one professor, right? So it's a very different, it's really a very enhanced set of digital courseware. When I take something like that, apply world-class graphic designers, start to think about how do students learn in an online environment, embed that into my pedagogy, my curriculum, and then put instructional support and services support and the data analytics to watch it in the background, then I start to get something really, really interesting.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I did have one question.
I knew you did.
Let's assume we went with a lead institution structure, and you talked to us about possibly having to lower the admission standards, and instead of a 3.7, you've got to have a 3.0 or a 2.7 or whatever the number becomes. And our institutions who are currently successfully offering online courses say we don't want to be a part of that. So is the assumption that we would then say, you all stop your online courses? Or is the assumption, and have you factored into the cost, a lead institution running it at a 2.7 admission standard, and then those institutions who don't want to be a part of that standard still continuing to offer their online courses? In the latter two structures, maybe even the latter three structures, is everybody have to be on the same bus, and if you're not part of the team, you don't get to offer them anymore? Or will we still have a lead institution and then those universities with higher standards still continuing to run their courses on an institution-by-institution basis?
Well, I'll start with the criteria. I don't want to leave the impression that a scale online program has to have super low admission criteria, especially in the graduate arena. You're actually dealing with admission criteria that many institutions actually have and have had for some time. Many of them have the continuing professional education programs, their executive programs, right? These are all fairly open programs at most institutions. So I think the real crux of it is if we go big and bold, right, in one area, does that mean that others have to stop what they're doing? Well, I'll leave it to kind of the board and all to take a perspective on that. But many systems, if you will, have seen the ability to go bold here and allow others to do some things on their own. This is really about, we don't know how many purely online students that you have, right? We have no idea in the state of Florida right now how many within the system. It's about 30,000 in the independent colleges and universities. Vanessa, do you remember how many there were in the for-profit off the top of your head? It's a lot.
It's online and on-site.
Right, so that's right, because they don't track the online. The point is how do you drive your purely online degree programs to 40, 50,000 some odd students, right? If you take that as a real audacious goal, or at least start at 10,000, right? That requires, from our perspective, to really get there a lot more centralized coordination, a lot more scale, and a lot more marketing support behind it. Now, you might have that group doing that, right, if you went with options 3 or 4. That lead institution, those groupings of lead institutions or new institution driving to that scale, well, everybody else does something else as well. That's a perfectly viable outcome. But we're trying to figure out how do we really get the scale behind it to both scale up in terms of student count so you can achieve the 4 objectives that you all laid out to us before, but also so that you can achieve the efficiencies on the backside.
In your chart, though, I mean, I think the slide that's going to get a lot of attention is your 10-year projection cost per degree with all of those, admittedly, 10-year out assumptions. When you figured cost per degree on particularly the latter 2, 3, and 4, did you assume everybody was in the same page, or was there a factor of cost of also running institution by institution on top of that?
So we didn't factor other things that were happening on the side. No, we were really looking at if you did that, what would happen in the new institution or the lead institution. So we were not factoring others doing other things.
And so in your degrees produced then, the 77,000 degrees that you would assume in a lead institution scenario, those would be over and above the degrees from other institutions that might not want to be part of that lead institution, or did you
Yes.
assume?
Yeah, no, it would be over and above. And just to give you an example, I think right now, and Rainey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the community colleges, one of the most recent cohorts that graduated, there were 14 who graduated, or 20 students, period, who graduated with online degrees. For the university system, it's a very small number right now. So you're starting with a small base, but this would be additive. I think one of the things to think about to your question on the lead institution is, I think you encourage, if you were to go this road, encourage them to be creative. So you could have a lead institution who, to your example, has a 3.7 GPA. Well, they could design the best-in-class course. They could create the support services. They could create the data analytics infrastructure. But you could have an institution with a 3.0 who also offers the course. They provide the faculty, but the support services, the marketing are provided by the lead. They could have another institution with a different GPA. So the idea is here to take advantage of scale efficiencies and really we all heard from you, part of the goals of online is to increase access. So you want to be able to get to these individuals, and the ones who need online the most are the ones with families, with kids who are working, and they're going to be across the whole spectrum. So you don't want it shouldn't be for those with the lower GPAs. It shouldn't be for those for the higher. I think it sounds like what you told us is you're looking for a solution that can help everyone. And I think in any of these, we would encourage the institutions to be creative in how they do it.
Thank you.